Forget what you know about wrestling today. Long before the billion-dollar deals, wrestling was a war zone divided into territories, each run by a promoter who was basically a king. In this kingdom, there were crown jewels, cities that made so much money, controlling one meant you ran the entire empire. New York was one. St. Louis was another. But there was one prize that was the most insane of them all. For two wrestling empires, the old-school NWA and the brand-new AWA, the city of Chicago wasn't just a city, it was an all-out war for the future of wrestling. This is the story of how that war was fought, how it was won, and how, in the end, they both lost everything.
So, why was this war even happening? You have to see the battlefield. Mid-20th century Chicago was America's toughest city, a city of steel workers and absolute hustlers. It was a town that loved a real fight, and it fell completely in love with pro wrestling. That passion made Chicago one of the most profitable wrestling markets in the entire world. And this wasn't just about selling tickets. This was about creating legends. We're talking about giant outdoor stadiums like Comiskey Park, where tens of thousands of screaming fans packed in to watch. Then you had the legendary International Amphitheatre, a 10,000-seat death trap right next to the stockyards. The fans were so wild and so close that they would literally try to get in the ring. The insane atmosphere made every single match feel like a real war. But the real cheat code in Chicago wasn't the arenas, it was the TV stations. With the rise of superstations like WGN, controlling TV in Chicago meant your wrestlers were beamed into millions of homes across America. It was the ultimate power-up. While Vince McMahon Sr. had the Northeast on lock, Chicago was the strategic center of the entire wrestling universe. For years, this gold mine belonged to one group, the National Wrestling Alliance, the NWA. The NWA wasn't one company. It was a cartel of promoters who controlled everything. They had a shared world champion who traveled the country, and they had a system built to crush anyone who stepped out of line. And the NWA's guy in Chicago was a promoter named Fred Kohler. The man was a giant in the industry. He basically was NWA wrestling in Chicago. The city was completely locked down. The system was perfect. But in the late 1950s, a new challenger was rising. A guy with insane skills and a plan to burn the NWA to the ground. His name was Verne Gagne, and he was about to start a fire with Chicago as the prize. Verne Gagne was not your average wrestler. Before he was a pro, he was a world-class athlete. At the University of Minnesota, he was a two-time NCAA wrestling champion. He was on the U.S. Olympic team. He even played for the Chicago Bears. When this guy went pro, he had a level of legitimacy that was basically a superpower. He was a real fighter in a world of entertainers, and fans were obsessed with him. For years, Gagne was a top NWA star, but they would never give him the world championship. The NWA bosses were terrified of him. They knew he was too smart, too ambitious, and was building his own empire in Minneapolis. He was becoming a massive threat. By 1959, Gagne was done waiting. He and his partner bought the local NWA territory and had a plan. But the spark for their rebellion had actually been lit years earlier. After a wild NWA title match, a guy named Edouard Carpentier was declared the winner over the champion Lou Thesz. The NWA refused to recognize the title change, but a few promoters, including Chicago's own Fred Kohler, did. This created a massive controversy, which Gagne was about to use to blow up the entire system. In August 1960, Gagne and his partner made their move. They officially broke away from the NWA and created their own company, the American Wrestling Association, or AWA. They didn't just invent a title. They pointed out that Gagne had beaten Carpentier, the same guy Chicago already called a champion. Then they did something unbelievable. They gave the NWA champion 90 days to fight Gagne. When the NWA ignored them, the AWA just gave its first ever World Heavyweight Championship to Verne Gagne. This move was nuclear.
It was the first real challenge to the NWA's total dominance in over a decade. And while the AWA was born in Minneapolis, it had only one target: the Goldmine 400 miles away. Chicago was now up for grabs, and the AWA needed its TV money to survive. The old empire wasn't about to give up its most valuable city without a fight. But the AWA had a secret weapon, a man who was the living, breathing definition of Chicago. If Verne Gagne was the AWA's brain, this guy was its nuclear bomb. Known to the world as Dick the Bruiser, he was Chicago wrestling. A former player for the Green Bay Packers, the Bruiser was a cigar-chomping, beer-drinking tough guy who looked like he just won a bar fight, which he usually had. He wasn't just a star in Chicago, he was Chicago. But get this, the Bruiser was a 500 IQ genius hiding inside a brawler's body. Right after the AWA formed, he bought the Indianapolis Wrestling Company and renamed it the WWA. Officially, it was a separate company. In reality, it was the perfect secret weapon. Bruiser, a close friend of Gagne's, immediately made a deal to share wrestlers and recognize the AWA's championships. This gave the AWA a critical entry point into the Midwest. This is where the Cold War went to a whole new level. It wasn't about hostile takeovers, it was a war of influence, and it was all run by Dick the Bruiser. Here's his wild plan. Bruiser ran these gigantic shows in Chicago. As an AWA ally, he featured AWA stars everywhere. The main event might be Verne Gagne defending his AWA title. He and his partner, the Crusher, would defend their AWA tag team titles and sell out arenas. This gave the AWA instant, massive prestige in wrestling's most important city. But here's the craziest part. On the exact same shows, Bruiser would book wrestlers from the NWA. He'd bring in the NWA World Champion, guys like Gene Kiniski or Dory Funk Jr., to fight AWA stars, or even himself. These champion versus champion dream matches were like printing money. It was like seeing Marvel and DC characters in the same movie. Chicago fans got the best of both worlds, and the NWA and AWA got insanely rich without killing each other. Dick the Bruiser was playing both sides. He kept Chicago an open city. Thanks to him, the AWA became a legitimate threat to the NWA, using Chicago's money to get bigger. For a while, this Cold War was a massive success for everyone, but it was never going to last. The center of this entire war was one building, the International Amphitheatre. It was more than an arena. It was a character in this drama. A giant hall that smelled like stale beer and cigars. This was the stage for the AWA and NWA's biggest proxy battles. The shows Bruiser put on here are absolutely legendary. One night, fans could see the NWA champion defend his title against the Bruiser. The next night, it would be Verne Gagne putting the AWA title on the line. The crowds were unbelievable. A 1970s show at Comiskey Park with Gagne versus Baron von Raschke drew a ridiculous 21,000 people. These weren't just wrestling shows, they were mega events, proving Chicago was a gold mine. For over 10 years, this insane truce held up. The AWA and NWA coexisted in Chicago like two superpowers staring each other down. But in the early 1980s, everything changed forever. A new, much more dangerous villain emerged: Vince McMahon Jr. and his World Wrestling Federation. McMahon didn't care about territories or rules. He was invading everyone, stealing their stars and buying their TV time. Facing a new enemy, the old rivals, the AWA and NWA, did the unthinkable. They teamed up. In 1984, they formed a supergroup called Pro Wrestling USA, a united front to stop the WWF. They decided to run their own super show, a direct shot at the WWF's WrestleMania. The event was called Super Clash, The date was September 28, 1985. The location could only be one place, Chicago's Comiskey Park. It was the absolute peak of the AWA-NWA team-up. The card was monumental. In one main event, the AWA champion Rick Martel fought Stan Hansen. In the other, the NWA champion Ric Flair defended his title against Magnum TA. Over 20,000 fans jammed the stadium. Pro Wrestling USA looked like it could actually challenge the WWF. But behind the scenes, it all fell apart. Gagne and the NWA's Jim Crockett started fighting over who got more money from the gate. The spirit of teamwork was gone. The very event that was supposed to unite them ended up destroying their alliance. Pro Wrestling USA crumbled instantly. The truce was over, and the Cold War was about to become a fire that would burn them both to the ground. The collapse of Pro Wrestling USA was the end of everything. While the AWA and NWA were busy fighting over the money, Vince McMahon went into kill mode. His strategy was simple and absolutely brutal. Find the biggest star in any territory and steal them with promises of more money and more fame than they could ever imagine. The AWA was his #1 target. Verne Gagne's biggest star was a magnetic, unstoppable powerhouse named Hulk Hogan. But Gagne, an old-school purist, refused to make Hogan his champion, thinking he was more of a showman than a wrestler. This turned out to be a billion-dollar mistake. McMahon swooped in, signed Hogan, and built the entire WWF around him. And the rest is history. The attacks didn't stop. The WWF stole more and more of the AWA's talent. Even worse, they attacked the AWA in its own city, signing a deal that got the AWA kicked out of its main arena. Can you imagine getting kicked out of your own home? The AWA tried to fight back, running a show in Chicago on the same day as WrestleMania 2, but it was hopeless. Gagne grew desperate, trying to form new alliances, but it was too late. The egos and the fights over money destroyed everything. The company that once sold out massive stadiums started running shows in high school gyms. In 1991, the American Wrestling Association just quietly died. So, who actually won the battle for Chicago? In the short term, nobody. Both the AWA and NWA made a fortune from the city while their rivalry simmered. But in the long run, there were no winners. Their Cold War left them totally exposed to an enemy who played a different game. The NWA faded. The AWA disappeared. The only person who won was the outsider, the conqueror from the Northeast, Vince McMahon. But the legacy of this battle is insane. Decades of seeing multiple champions and different styles created the smartest and most hardcore wrestling fans in the world. Chicago became a city that demanded the best wrestling, period. That reputation is still true today, making Chicago one of the most electric wrestling cities on the planet. The war is over, but the battle for wrestling's greatest gold mine changed everything forever. The AWA is gone. The NWA territories are gone. The WWF conquered everything. But Chicago's insane fighting spirit, created in the chaos of the amphitheater and the fire of Verne Gagne's rebellion, lives on in its wrestling soul. If you love crazy wrestling history like this, make sure you smash that like button and subscribe for more stories. And tell us in the comments, what other legendary wrestling wars should we break down next? Thanks for watching.